Back in May, earlier this year, a friend of mine told me that Carl Benjamin and Milo Yiannopoulos were heading to Truro to hold a public free speech type event, mainly on the subject of Brexit, or at least the insanity that we've lived under since that so-called referendum. The event was part of Carl's tour of the Southwest under the UKIP banner. Now, I've never been to any of these kind of events before. This time, for some reason, despite the long journey, I decided to head down and watch. And I thought my camera gear might be useful, so I threw that in the car as well. And it was useful. If you are someone who believes in the value of free speech in any modern, functional and civilised society, then some of the things you're going to see in this video will probably shock you. If not, well, you're probably just another Milkshake artist, aren't you? What I witnessed in Truro and elsewhere really opened my eyes to the madness we are rapidly descending into, and I am getting more and more worried about just where the hell this country is heading at the moment. My experience in Truro led me to attend a few other events, and I was glad I did, because I witnessed various threats or attacks aimed at Carl, as well as a brazen physical assault on Milo, along with not just an admission by the offender, but a very proud one at that. Shortly after the assault, which happened right under the nose of the many police officers wandering around, I had an interesting little chat with Devon and Cornwall's finest, if only that phrase still made any sense in 2019, which it doesn't. The man who assaulted Milo, if I can call him a man and haven't misgendered him, although I suspect he identifies as a Teletubby, actually turned out to be a Liberal Democrat election candidate. I wish I could say I was surprised when I found that out. I think the lovely fluffy Lib Dems need to know the true nature of this person they chose to represent them, as if they don't already know. His apparent belief that physical violence is acceptable so long as it's in the name of Marxism, that's probably the one thing that got him the position in the first place. I think it's important to name and shame as many of these cretins as possible, especially this particular little tyrant in waiting. I'll be doing that shortly. I'll also enjoy publishing some other examples of the unstoppable hypocrisy from other oh-so-tolerant leftists, the kind of hypocrisy they only seem to slip up and put on display when they're not aware that there's a hidden camera and microphone nearby. After the recent surge in violent attacks on numerous centre-right speakers, and having seen how the police usually do absolutely nothing about it, I've recently become quite interested in going to one of these events myself, if for no other reason than to capture evidence, to make sure that the police can't keep failing in their duties and getting away with it, and ignoring this stuff. And as much as it's completely wrong of them to do that, I'm not that surprised when the mainstream liberal media report this sort of thing like this.
Now to the UK, where demonstrators aren't just hurling insults at politicians, they're hurling milkshakes. Gwen Baumgartner's in London with more on how the sweet treat is being used as a tool of protest.
What? A tool of protest? You can't just invent new tools of protest whenever you feel like it, to suit the spin you want to put on the reporting of, in this case, a criminal assault. There's already many ways to legally and peacefully protest, and then there are crimes, which are never a form of protest, they're just crimes. Otherwise, I could just wake up tomorrow and decide to carry out a protest on Jeremy Corbyn by, let me see, I'll punch him in the face today. That's my protest for today. It's ridiculous. A physical attack on someone is not a protest. It is illegal violence. The motivation behind these milkshake attacks is social and or political. And there's a name for this sort of thing. It's called terrorism. And we already have a widely accepted definition for terrorism, which is the use of violence or the threat of violence in the pursuit of political, religious, ideological or social objectives. If the cap fits. What's most ridiculous is that these same people who attempt to spin a criminal and violent act into something as benign and innocent as a protest, these are the same people who are constantly shouting about how mere words can be used as an act of real violence and can actually hurt people. No, they can't. Only actions can actually hurt people. The secret is in the words. It shouldn't be hard to work out. If you want to include your feelings, then we know where that leads. I feel hurt by every Liberal Democrat who wants to undermine the democracy of this country by publicly stating they will undo the Brexit vote, where their side lost. That annoys me. It really hurts my feelings. But it does not injure me. And that's why I shouldn't be able to have every Liberal Democrat arrested for hurting me, because they really didn't. So no, a physical attack is not, and never will be, a tool of protest. You are the tool, and you're a tool of the radical left, which seeks to twist the minds of everyone you can possibly influence into accepting some kind of new system where we have one law for you and one law for everyone who disagrees with you. And it's precisely this twisted shit which infects every corner of our media, our education system, and our legal system, leading to what we are clearly living under now, more and more so, a two-tier policing system. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the form of liberalism. How right he was.
Okay, good stuff.
A warm welcome for British politician Nigel Farage took a cold turn at a campaign stop in England this week. The divisive Brexit Party leader was hit by a banana and salted caramel milkshake.
Did they really need to tell us the flavour of it? Neither the man throwing it nor Nigel Farage had any interest in the specific flavour from the menu. It was bought as a weapon. It was just a milkshake. So why does CBS feel the need to report on the flavour of it? Why? To further devalue the seriousness of what they're covering, and to keep the undertone of humour, which is obviously a subtle but important part of this propaganda piece. This is what propaganda looks like. It's those little extra words, the little grins as they announce a man's been attacked in the street, which programs their retarded audience with the subconscious notion that this is actually good news. If this was a Muslim family being milkshaked by a skinhead in the street, I've got a sneaky feeling her face would be a lot more serious, and her tone. And I very much doubt the specifics of whether the caramel was salted or not would come anywhere near the script.
He and his tailored suit became the latest target of milkshaking.
He and his tailored suit. There's another one of those little weasel words. Programming words. He's got a tailored suit. He's rich. Communist bullshit. What are you wearing, darling? Sackcloth?
A political statement making a splash in Britain.
There you go again. Couldn't resist, could you? Milkshaking is a political statement making a splash in Britain. No, milkshaking is a criminal offence taking place in Britain.
Complete failure.
Protesters are targeting right-wing politicians on the campaign trail.
McDonald's has made the decision to stop selling milkshakes when there's a Brexit rally nearby. Its competitor is taking a different approach.
Burger King UK came under fire after tweeting, "Dear people of Scotland, we're selling milkshakes all weekend. Have fun."
It's one thing for a multinational company like Burger King to be making outright political statements through its Twitter account. But it's another thing entirely to basically support and encourage people to go out and commit criminal acts on the streets of Britain. But it is a free market, and I'm actually quite pleased they wrote that tweet, because it means I will no longer be lining their pockets with my own money without realising that they're obviously a bunch of radical leftists with zero respect for the rule of law. So that's the last time I or anyone I can possibly influence will buy anything from Burger King, and that's a satisfying thought. I'd urge anyone else to do the same. Think about who you give your money to. Let them pay for their political opinions just like we have to, although we won't be milkshaking the director of Burger King UK because we are better than that.
In the latest in a series of attacks on right-wing politicians, Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage was doused with a milkshake yesterday. That was actually salted caramel, if anyone's wondering.
No, nobody was wondering. But you had to say it, didn't you? Because it's on your mass media indoctrination script. Now, I can't even guess when I last watched a single second of any mainstream media channel. But most people watch one particular channel or read one particular newspaper because they think that's the type of news they want to hear, as if it's different from the other sources. Most people think that they make a choice when they select any of the mainstream media networks to absorb their worldview from. I've got friends who only use the Sky app on their phone. I've got friends who only listen to the BBC because they still fall for this lie that it's impartial. But I wonder how many people watch one particular channel while recording all the others to see how they compare. Not very many by all accounts, and that's just the way they like it. because that way very few people discover the truth about the mainstream media, which is that while the different outlets give the impression of being different by playing Punch and Judy to act out a unique perspective on lots of tiny irrelevant issues, they can and do all conspire when the need arises on issues which really matter to them. When the few people who own 90% of the media, at least, decide to do a job on the minds of the entire nation, or perhaps even the entire world, they seem to be very well equipped and fully motivated to do so.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarmingly, some media outlets publish things that simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Be afraid. Be very afraid. If these clips are not just a weird, statistically impossible coincidence, then there is only one possible explanation. It's deliberate. It's conspired. And somebody, somewhere, gets to write the script. This brainwashing process can be applied to absolutely anything they choose. They being the current oligarchs who wish to steer the UK, maybe every Western country by all accounts, in the direction that they want. That current direction is towards the radical left, as if you needed telling. I can't imagine how much further to the left it could possibly go. But then, I said things like that just 5 or 10 years ago, and, well, little bits happened since then, hasn't it?
John Cleese, welcome. You haven't left the country. You haven't left the country.
No, I'm leaving in November. I think you said I'm threatening to leave, but I actually am leaving. I'm making arrangements now.
And why is that? Just talk us through.
Because I'm so disappointed with so much about this country at the moment, and I put my shoulder to the... Sorry, am I interrupting you? Sorry.
It was a little off-camera chat to our camera people. Yes, I'm with you.
You're with me. I just think that so much of this country is disappointing. And I put my shoulder to the wheel on proportional representation and then on Leveson too. And when they were both kicked out by right-wing governments, I just thought to myself, all right, I give up, I'll try somewhere else.
If you grabbed any lefty from the 1990s and transported them here to 2019, they would be considered homophobic, Islamophobic, transphobic, and probably quite a few isms to go along with their phobias. They would be considered far-right, which I'm sure would come as a hell of a shock to them, as they were proud to be the mainstay of the left in their own time. You've only got to watch the liberal comedies and BBC programmes from the 1990s to see this as clear as day. Try watching Friends, about as mainstream and progressive as you could find back then, and listen to some of Ross's jokes about his lesbian wife and how, quote, weird it was that she had a female partner and wanted to raise the child with her. Or listen to the repetitive and terribly homophobic jokes about whether Chandler is gay or not. It was a running thing for series after series.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Mr. Bing. Nora. Charles. It's so great to see you both here.
Yes. Although I think we may be seeing a little too much of some people. Aren't you a little old to be wearing a dress like that?
Don't you have a little too much penis to be wearing a dress like that?
Oh, my God.
Hey, hey.
Wow, you look just like your son, Mrs. Tribbiani.
What? Are you referring to my man's bag? At first, I thought it just looked good, but it's practical, too. Check it out. It's got compartments for all your stuff. Your wallet, your keys, your address book, your makeup.
I've been around long enough to actually remember what life was like around those times when these programmes were made, unlike most of the noisiest Marxists today. And I remember being fairly lefty myself, back when that didn't entail destroying your own country, being ashamed of your skin, teaching your children they're born evil, as mine are white, unfortunately for them, making sure they know more about everyone else's history than their own, and brainwashing my daughter to think she can do anything her brother can do, which is surely setting her up for failure, because my son's got concrete plans to become a man. It often brings a smile to my face to think about how every one of today's leftists will eventually do as everyone does and grow up, learn what life's about, get a house, maybe some kids, a career instead of a job, a pension plan and so on. And then suddenly they will be the new far right when they politely question why their kids want to smash the system they've contributed to and struggle to build themselves a life in. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and the only saving grace, the only spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down for me, is the fact that everyone will swallow it in their own time. Even you petulant, ungrateful Antifa types. One day, your life will demand of you a bit more hard work and selflessness than burning stuff and assaulting people. And just when you've started seeing the benefits of that hard work, just when you can start to feel proud of what you've achieved in your life, someone about half your age who's barely old enough to drive a car or drink a beer will come along and smash it to shit. And this whole destructive journey begins with something as silly as throwing a milkshake. As Malcolm X said so accurately, the mass media has the power to make the guilty innocent and the innocent guilty. When they so blatantly program their viewers with subtle suggestions that this is acceptable behaviour against a certain group of people, that crucial little step's been taken to write off all those you disagree with as not even worthy of the same rights and protections that you are. One of liberalism's greatest achievements was the principle of equality under the law for everyone, not just those you agree with, not just those you like, but most importantly those you do not. Once you write off a group of people as evil or scum purely for having an opinion you don't like, then you dehumanize them and give yourself that excuse you were possibly looking for to treat them differently to how you would tolerate being treated yourself. Don't you get it? You're the fascists. You really are the fascists, by every definition you could possibly find. It takes real strength to be a genuine liberal, to be genuinely tolerant. It takes significant effort and self-control. You have to dig deep to find the character, the willpower, the real tolerance within yourself for those you most hate. Anyone can tolerate gay people when they like gay people. Anyone can tolerate Muslims when they like Muslims. You don't prove that you're tolerant by standing alongside in solidarity with people who you sympathise with or care about, people you go to the pub with, people you chat to on Facebook. That's not tolerance. Real tolerance is shown by how you treat those you can't stand, those you would really love to punch, those you despise with every inch of your being. This is the true meaning of the actual word, tolerance. To tolerate something means to put up with it, even though you don't want to, don't have to, and you can't stand it. That's when you begin to be tolerant. That's not the height of tolerance. That's the start of tolerance. It's not tolerant to be pro people coming into the country when you like people coming into the country. To be tolerant is someone who's anti-immigration, to tolerate an immigrant who he meets in the street. That shows tolerance. To tolerate someone you consider to be far right when you're far left, that's tolerance, or that would be tolerance if you ever did that. So when Carl Benjamin wanders over with a microphone and politely asks someone to sit and have a conversation with him, and they throw something at him or call him a name and scream and shout and run away and do everything but talk to him, you've shown zero tolerance. And the common retort to that is, I don't tolerate fascists, or I don't tolerate scum, or I don't tolerate Nazis, or I don't tolerate racists, or I don't tolerate misogynists, and you've always got an excuse not to tolerate anyone, so all that makes you is intolerant. Okay, now that I've got a few things off my chest, let me show you the video which, of all of them, probably was the one which pushed me into the decision to go and watch Carl and Milo in Cornwall.
I don't want to silence anybody. I want us to have a real conversation, and we're going to disagree. But the idea that that you are fighting fascism by silencing people, you then become the fascists.
So I was going to.
So far, this seems like an intelligent discussion, the type one would expect and indeed hope to see on a university campus, if anywhere, where people go to be challenged, or at least they used to, what could possibly go wrong?
It's fascinating. I find it fascinating because I'm constantly attacked by the alt-right online as being this wimp, as not realizing the importance of race or whatever, constantly berated as some kind of lefty by the alt-right. And then the left attacks me as a racist and a fascist. And actually, after this Exeter event, I don't know if you know about the Exeter event that happened, here they go, where some people try to silence me.
Apparently they're going to knock out, they wanted to knock out the security guards.
Oh, doesn't it just give you a warm, fuzzy feeling inside when the sensible, intelligent and tolerant majority successfully drives out an aggressive, fascist minority element who smash their way into a civilised and truly free-thinking gathering. Hooray for democracy. I wanted to cut that down, but I think it's important to watch and listen to these utter gobshites in all their glory. It's also worth pointing out, as always happens in these situations, the powers that be or those in charge, they always plead gently with the aggressive, lawless tyrants and order the law-abiding good people to back away, back away. As a journalist, I've had experience of many of these kinds of situations, much more serious ones too. And this is a pattern I've seen time and time again, no matter what the environment, no matter who the people involved. It just always happens. I've got a theory on it too. I think the reason this happens is because the people in charge, or the people trying to sort out the disorder or return some civility to the proceedings, they instinctively know that one side are complete animals and therefore no point reasoning with. And the other side are the decent, honest people who actually respect other people enough to accede to the reasonable requests that they do whatever it is, even when they're riled up and full of adrenaline. These are the people we can rely on. These are the people they can rely on. And this is why these are the people who are always told to make the biggest compromises. After all, why ask someone utterly uncompromising to make compromises? I hope you noticed where the most diversity is in that clip. It's on the side of those seeking to expand their minds by listening to a discussion, probably on issues which challenge them, perhaps even issues which repulse some of them. There are more non-white faces on the side of freedom of speech there than on the side of the fascists trying to shut it down. Watch it again and have a look for yourself. All these Far Eastern and Middle Eastern fascists, we really need to infringe on their rights, don't we? The rights which are probably a large part of the reason they're in this country, in this university, in this culture in the first place. Hey, why not just deport them all? That would prevent them hearing the debate. You know best, after all. Can't let these people decide for themselves what's suitable for their ears and their minds, can you? You know best, as always, and when someone doesn't believe that you do, well, you can just violently intervene to make sure they don't go off the rails. Your rails. Your tyrannical fascist rails, where only stuff you approve of is allowed to exist. Hooray for tolerance, acceptance and inclusivity. What a bunch of morons you are, and hypocrites. And what is it with the face veils? Have you all got halitosis or something? What are you afraid of? If you genuinely feel good about what you're doing, grow a pair and show yourself, like the brave people on the stage in front of you. Probably the most important thing about this clip for me, though, is how it shows both the decency and the true tolerance in Carl Benjamin. I mean, how the hell he restrained himself to just hanging onto his microphone, I'll never know. This is a perfect example of tolerant and peaceful values, and a clear show of personal restraint. The weapon of the strong to anyone who subscribes to Gandhi's teachings. He had every reason to feel threatened and endangered. He was. He had every reason to defend himself physically, but he did the absolute minimum necessary to just avoid being robbed of his microphone and assaulted. The man in the white top who came to his aid was actually assaulted. If it wasn't for the unfortunate fact that Carl Benjamin is a far-right sexist, misogynist, racist, fascist, Islamophobic, transphobe, I would say he deserves huge credit for his behaviour here, especially when faced with such absolute fascism and physical aggression himself. Here's a man having a quiet, peaceful, intelligent conversation with two other consenting adults also wanting to have that conversation, being watched by a group of people who want to listen to the discussion. Why the need to aggressively disrupt it? Because they don't want anyone to listen to such a discussion, in case they agree with any of it, or in case it opens their mind, or in case it makes them think a bit more freely than the radical left want them to. This is the greatest fear of the left, rational reasoned debate, because it genuinely is the real threat to their dogmatic ideology. The only way they can maintain the journey they're taking us all on to outright Marxism is by preventing people like Carl in this instance from discussing the issues articulately and sensibly. If protesting and name-calling fails to deter these annoying freethinkers from spreading their dangerous common sense to an equally open-minded audience, then tactics like doxing and destroying careers are used. If those methods fail, the next strategy is pulling their funding and getting the Marxist conspiracy that is Silicon Valley to intervene and censor them both technologically and financially. If all of that fails, then comes the physical violence and attacks, which is where we are now. But I wonder, no, I worry, and I really do worry daily about this, as even this sort of thuggery is failing to achieve their objectives. What is their next strategy going to be? Maybe Joe Brand gave us a little hint recently. I sincerely hope not. We've already seen concrete in milkshakes in the States, and even just on Carl's trip to the sleepy southwest. There was horse manure used, tyres slashed, presumably with a knife, overt and menacing threats from various people, and more than one or two attempted physical attacks. I'm firmly of the view that Carl actually came very close to being stabbed too, by someone telling him to get out of Cornwall and, quote, fuck off back to the UK. You really can't make this shit up, but as hilariously retarded as this stuff is, it's actually far from a joke. To see a man with his hand clenching a knife in his white-knuckled fist while making his way to confront Carl face to face, especially to tell him to get out of his country, the irony just becomes too much to bear. My aim in attending the event was just to evidence some of this stuff, and after watching the recent videos of Carl being attacked virtually everywhere he goes by a minority of people, I might add, I had a feeling there would be some stuff worth capturing on tape. And so, on the 10th of May, I travelled down to Truro. I was thinking about it on the journey, and I was quite excited. I was hoping to see some vibrant, healthy public discussion at the very least. Maybe with a bit of overzealous mincing and pursing of lips from Her Royal Highness Queen Milo. Much to my disappointment, not from Milo though, he was mincing like a sausage factory, I didn't see an awful lot of real debate taking place. Carl and Milo presented their ideas and arguments, and the opposition presented, oh let's see, insults, abuse, violence, disruption, pretty much everything but any verbal arguments. The most memorable comments from the predictably insane lefties were a blasting trumpet and sound system to drown the event in what sounded like music from an East German snuff film. He's now famous in Truro, actually, for his trumpet protest against the far right, although I got a sneaky feeling he'll be better known for something else very shortly, namely his ridiculing of disabled people. Would you believe? Stay tuned for that. The unfailing love and compassion towards less fortunate people than themselves, which these lefties possess, it really does take my breath away sometimes. Such lovely people. Now then, what other nuggets of eloquence did we see? Oh yes, a painting, allegedly of the owner's vagina. Classy lady. It looked more like a bowl of fruit to me, I've got to be honest, but then so did the woman holding it. And then there was the eloquent offering from the crazy woman in the red straitjacket, who, after being prevented from clawing the veins out of Carl's neck, thanks to the very Reverend Simon Sideways, screamed something along the lines of, "Fuck you, you fucking wankers, fuck the lot of you." A few days before the event, I did a little bit of Googling to see what sort of Marxist lunatics we have in the Southwest, if any. To my surprise, there's no shortage of them. So I took a few screen captures just in case anything serious happened and it might be useful evidence. After all, if they're going to be able to use Silicon Valley platforms, which apparently nasty people normally can't do, then if they're going to use those platforms to plan their criminal acts and then they carry them out, then I thought it might be useful evidence to show that they actually had the intent in the first place. Criminal intent being an important part of a prosecution, of course. And there wasn't any shortage of intent either, as you can see. What I find fascinating about this is that this is the far-left Antifa movement. These are the Cornwall anti-fascists, but they place a lot of emphasis on the fact that they're the Cornwall anti-fascists. I thought we were all the same. I thought where you came from made no difference to anything. Remember to come out tomorrow to oppose the racists, defend Cornwall from this divisive swill, soak 'em in Milkshake. Sargon and Milo are coming to Truro on Friday. Yes, really. Come out and show them they are not welcome here, and show them that Cornwall is no safe place for racists. Well, is it okay for racists to be somewhere else then? Is it just Cornwall you're interested in? That sounds a little bit nationalist to me. A bit far right, if you will. So, you're obviously quite nationalist. I won't use the term racist, as I don't mistake national pride for racism. Rather, the word racism is used to scare anyone away from having any national pride. And you're also obviously socialist and or communist. The difference doesn't really matter, as socialism is just communism in sheep's clothing. And that's not just my view. Lenin himself said something very similar. So what do we get when we combine nationalism with socialism? Oh, I wonder, what was it? Oh, yeah, I remember. It's that word you call everybody else who disagrees with you. Nazis. National Socialists. How come it's okay for you to be more nationalist about your county than Carl or any other English person can be about their entire country. And I get it, some Cornish people want independence, fair dues, I mean, it's your place, and I think if you got independence, then you could call it your country, and I think you'd be nationalists about your country then, too. If you had really thought things through with a free mind instead of an indoctrinated one, and if you stopped trying to suppress your clear ethnic and geographic pride in Cornwall, its cultural heritage, its proud history of staving off the Roman expansion, etc., etc., you just might realise that you're attacking someone who stands up more for what you believe in than you do yourselves. It's clear what you believe in. Whether you mean to show it or not, you do. I know my personal view, and I've got a strong feeling Carl would sympathise with this too, which is that Cornwall should be proud of itself and its identity and its history and its language and its culture and so on. You should be proud, but why other people being proud of what they belong to somehow makes them racists, I just despair at how dumb or misled or confused you must be. I know several people in Cornwall, and I should mention, they're not English people who moved down to Cornwall, they're proper Cornish, real Cornish, proud of being ethnically Cornish, as they put it, who consider themselves Cornish, not English. That's the 3 words they use for their identity. I'm Cornish, not English. We get on bloody great, and we have many interesting chats about the importance of all people preserving their heritage, no matter who they are or where they're from. The only difference I can see between you and these good friends of mine is that with them being older, they didn't go through the overtly Marxist schooling system. You could blame the English for that one too, if you think about it. So they haven't been brain-frazzled with radical leftism, and thus they remain just decent, hard-working Cornish people who are proud, get this, UKIP voters, because they realise that if they want their cultural heritage to be preserved in Cornwall, it might not be a bad start to undo the act of handing over the entire nation's sovereignty and cultural future to people in Brussels who don't even speak English, let alone Cornish. I really can't believe that this even needs explaining. You leftists really have been taken over by demons, ideological demons, which convince you to not dare think for yourselves, just preach the same zombie-like mantras like English fascists out of Cornwall, without stopping for a second to hear your own words and ask yourselves if they make any sense on any level at all. Moving on. Bring flags, banners and milkshake. Yeah, we're planning a criminal assault. English fascists out of Cornwall. Ooh. I've got a friend who's Irish. Do you reckon he's welcome? He's a fascist. And just in case anyone missed it before the last 2 or 3 times, bring the bloody milkshake. Don't forget the milkshake. Actually, that ad or whatever it is at the top, talk to neighbours, not to cops. No, we call them police officers or coppers, but not cops. We're not in LA. I can't stand this late night Sky TV language. And it doesn't do much for your Cornish nationalist image either. But let's not get sidetracked with my racist pride in my linguistic heritage, shall we? What does this say? afed.org.uk, is it? Let's have a look. And there we have it, the Anarchist Federation. I've got an open mind. I've heard some compelling arguments for anarchism, stateless societies and all that. I've genuinely got an open mind, so let's see what they stand for. As anarchist communists, I can't get much further than that. How do you enact communism while you're anarchistic? Okay. We fight for a world without leaders. Good luck with that one. Just out of interest, who's going to lead you into battle? You might want to start with slightly smaller goals, lower hanging fruit first. Maybe fight for a world which is flat. Didn't you see the irony or the hypocrisy of what you do and what you say? How the two things never seem to marry up. I presume one person, set this website up. I assume someone has the money to pay for the hosting account. I assume someone writes the content. I assume someone's leading the ideas for building this movement to change the world into a world without leaders. You're not going to get to a world without leaders, without leading the world to a world without leaders, and then you become a fucking leader. I'm just, oh, this is a head fuck, sorry. Where power is shared equally amongst communities. It sounds so nice and fluffy, doesn't it? I've got just 3 words for you there. Shared by whom? And people are free to reach their full potential. That's a nice message. We do this by supporting working class resistance to exploitation and oppression, organised alongside our neighbours, so long as they're the right type of neighbours, and workmates, so long as they're the right type of workmates, host informative events. You speak? You deal with information? I've got to come to one of these events. I'm going to have to keep an eye on this site, and I suggest everybody else does so that we can go to their events. Maybe we should disrupt? No, we should go and talk to them. Well, that would be disruption, wouldn't it? Okay, I think we've probably seen enough. I did actually look a bit deeper and, well, let's just say it only gets more nonsensical if that's even possible. How an anarchist can be a communist at the same time. I mean, the two things are diametrically opposed. An anarchist wants no state, no government. A communist wants government control of absolutely frigging everything. You can't have your cake and eat it. I've just got to check this isn't me, because this just seems too crazy to be true. Definition of anarchism. The theory or doctrine that all forms of government are oppressive and undesirable and should be abolished. Active resistance and terrorism against the state, as used by some anarchists. Rejection of all forms of coercive control and authority. Okay. And now for communism, a system of government in which the state plans and controls the economy and a single, often authoritarian party holds power, claiming to make progress toward a higher social order in which all goods are equally shared by the people. So, if I've got this right, you believe in banning all forms of government, smashing the system, making sure there's no coercive control or authority over anybody, at the same time running a system of control and authoritarian power which claims to progress everyone to a higher social order through its power and controls the economy and every part of life. Right, yeah, it makes sense now.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Think, McFly. Think.
I think I've just worked out why you refuse to debate anyone on anything. Your raison d'etre can't even stand up, let alone your arguments, can't even stand up to Wikipedia. Never mind some critical analysis or, heaven forbid, some debate with someone who's got a brain. Oh, hang on. Unless I've just sussed this. I think I might have just sussed this. The reason you put the two things together is because without the trendy mention of anarchism, you wouldn't attract many people just on the word communism. So anarchism is the ground bait, but communism is the actual hook bait. That's clever stuff, I'll give you that. Some people come swimming past your informative events, catch the tasty whiff of a world without coercive control and corrupt politicians, and to have total freedom of association and behaviour. Oh, that shit smells so good. But the small print is the fact that you will need to run the massively coercive communist state in order to actually deliver all that freedom for them. Damn, and I bet your victims weren't taught enough about communist history at school to pick out the taste of the poison you laced that bait with. Of course they were all too busy learning about the dangers of the far right. Nobody mentioned the left. So with you being such radical leftists, they'll feel all nice and warm being as far away from the evil far right as possible. You're an undiscovered genius. Yeah, you really are. You should audition for the next Bond villain. Shit, I've got you sussed, haven't I? The thing is, the 20th century's got you sussed too. And even though you might convince a few mentally challenged or otherwise challenged individuals into your little Stalinist bear trap, I think even you know that you're never going to talk a majority of people into it. So you'll just have to beat them into it, won't you? The UK's roads are famous for their congestion. I'm used to sitting in traffic jams virtually every time I go out, but for some stupid reason I thought the southwest might not be that bad. I was wrong about that. Wrong enough to make me an hour late for the start of the event. Whilst that was pretty annoying, it was twice as annoying when I got there to hear that my delay had cost me witnessing the early bird milkshaking, which had already occurred. That was really annoying. Actually, if you look at the footage of it frame by frame, you can see that the masked attacker, despite having had weeks to prepare, failed to actually open his milkshake beforehand. You can see from this still image, he's squeezing the bottle for all it's worth, aiming it square in Simon's face, but firing blanks by all accounts. It gives a whole new meaning to the word impotence, doesn't it? Mr. Action was apparently foiled by his own weapon. Thankfully, someone else filmed the melee that it descended into. Brave man in the red top decided to step in, don't know who he is. And there's some punching. There's a kick, yeah. Where's the police? Yeah, someone who's still got faith, I suppose. The police are watching the cameras, love. They're up in the control centre, staying out of harm's way, making sure they don't get mistaken for supporting the far right, and watching the cameras to make sure that any offences are only committed by the left, so they can stay and enjoy their coffee and donuts, I suppose. The sad thing about this is, in the old days, police would proactively look for any potential problems, flashpoints, whatever they call it, and as I've already shown, a quick look on Facebook the night before, UKIP, Milkshakes, Truro, Antifa Truro, Carl Benjamin Truro. I don't think I even got to 2 or 3 searches. I think it was the first one, and I saw straight away and those clips I showed weren't the only ones. That was just one particular web page, one particular Facebook group. There was plenty of other comments. So a police officer worth his salt would surely, or hers, would surely sit there and think, right, there's some people planning on actually committing an assault here, so we've got officers around the town, we'll get a couple down there, have a coffee, they can stand around, do a bit of high visibility, proactive policing, and hopefully deter any of this sort of street level violence, which is not doing much for the town, not doing much for the passers-by, could have hurt someone quite easily, could have resulted in someone being injured. Why don't they do this? Well, it's tricky, because if they'd been there, they might have had to arrest someone on the wrong side. Okay, I'm cynical, I don't deny that, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. They did put a few officers down there after this incident, but too little too late maybe? Bit of an empty gesture? Conspiracy with Antifa? No, obviously not, but the point is, there was plenty of reason to suspect that this was going to happen. It was planned in full public view, on Facebook of all places, where, as we know, the police spend an inordinate amount of time investigating things these days, so they could easily have done their job to preserve the Queen's peace and prevent any disorder. It would have been so easy, and given the number of officers on the scene shortly after this incident, and they stayed all day, they were obviously available and not tied up anywhere. There was plenty on duty. More to the point, and this really annoys me as it happened in Plymouth too, and possibly Exeter, there's CCTV there. I was pretty sure there was, but I double-checked and found this.
Hello, my name's Graham Wilkinson, and I'm in Truro this morning on Lemon Quay, where the merry-go-round has been completely destroyed in a fire overnight. And the fire service are actually able to monitor the CCTV here in Lemon Quay directly, and they could see the fire spreading. 2 fire engines were here quite quickly on scene. This
reporter is standing, Christ, I would say within a few feet of where that milkshake attack started. CCTV is always monitored. Somebody, somewhere, wasn't eating a toffee crisp, they were watching that live. And even if they were sat in front of the screen but otherwise engaged, maybe tracking the movements of some hateful comment wandering the streets somewhere else, it's absolutely certain that it was recorded and stored for a good month or so at least. So what did they do? Did they rewind the tapes and see if they could locate the offender?
Yeah.
That's what they paid for. That's what the taxpayer spends tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds on: the equipment, the cameras, the staff to monitor them. They did nothing. Once the first call came from the public that there was a disorder, they would have been monitoring those cameras immediately. That's if they weren't doing so already, and having a chuckle to themselves, which I would bet a lot of money they probably were. The usual procedure would be to send officers straight to the scene, and while they're on their way, they get a description over the radio by whoever's looking at the screen. And they would help the officers on the ground find and arrest the offender as quickly as possible. But what am I talking about? That's for normal crimes. Crimes where the victims aren't far-right Nazis. and the perpetrators aren't far-left radicals with a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's so easy to avoid locking these people up if you never actually catch them, but the political will is against doing so in the police force. Imagine if Reverend Simon had bashed the idiot's head in with the spine of his King James Bible, putting him in a coma or something. That CCTV footage would have popped up pretty damn quick, I can assure you. So why not in this instance? Well, the most innocent reason, the least cynical reason, is that the police don't see it as serious enough to bother with this kind of thing. Yet they see a hurtful tweet plenty serious enough, so that's a tad confusing and inconsistent for me. More to the point, one day very soon, sadly, the police are going to have to start taking stuff like this seriously because it isn't going to go away. It's going to get worse. And I, for one, personally wouldn't take being milkshaked in the street by some stranger to me who's angry at me without, at the very least, subduing the culprit until the police arrived. And that is very likely to be a fight to do so, because you've seen what happens. They're not going to come quietly. They're not going to wait around if I ask them to. And I'm not going to lose that fight. I hope it doesn't happen, and I won't be the one who casts the first stone. That much is for certain, but I also won't watch someone throw an unknown liquid in my face and wait around to find out if it was the Joe Brand flavour, at which point I got no eyesight the rest of my life. Fuck that for a game of soldiers. I'm bashing that fucker as hard as necessary to make sure he isn't moving until the police arrive. I dare any of you listening to serve up a milkshake in the face of one of your local bobbies. And I'd like to see how long you're vertical for. My money's on your face eating concrete in under a second. Sadly, I don't think the authorities will start taking this stuff seriously until something extremely tragic happens. And on your head be it. I just pity the poor soul, whichever side they're on, who will have to suffer life-changing injuries or worse before the police will start doing their job, preventing crime and maintaining public safety for law-abiding citizens carrying out their legally protected right to air their views. Speaking of which, I grabbed myself a drink, a milkshake actually, as it was pretty warm, and I had a wander around Lemon Key. As you can hear, the trumpeter was doing his best to ruin it for everyone. Carl and Milo were already engaged in what sounded like a good discussion with an intelligent and reasonable person on the issue of plastics and general waste type issues. I listened to quite a bit of it, and I actually think that debate did a lot to turn the middle grounders against the protesters. I actually heard quite a few complaints from staunch Remainers about the stupidity of trying to drown out the conversation. They clearly wanted to tackle Carl and Milo head on about some of the things they've said, and that's exactly what this event is for. And all these types of events, they are the chance for you to come out and tell them what they did wrong, or tell them why you think they're wrong. The only people who want to shut that up are people who can't actually do that. They can't actually present a reason why they're wrong. They just hate them. I spent a bit of time trying to engage in conversation with some of the protesters, and I was surprised to find a few of them were respectful and genuinely interested in talking to someone of a different viewpoint. I had one particularly enjoyable conversation with an outright socialist. We couldn't have been more ideologically opposed. But, as is always true, all people have some common ground, and we found some quite quickly. And then we enjoyed discussing where we diverged on one or two issues. I can't say why this pretty staunch leftist was so amenable and polite. But I've got a feeling it's, again, something to do with age. He may be far left, but far left didn't always mean irrational, abusive and violent. I believe he grew up in an era where things like manners, common decency, respect for true diversity, etc. was taught in schools, and generally believed by all sides to be the proper way to behave. Either way, he was a nice bloke, and I could easily have spent an hour or two in his company with no shortage of mutual respect between us. After a nice cordial end to our conversation, joking about how there wasn't much point talking any further as the trumpeter started blasting his anti-free speech device right in our ears, again, he wandered off and stood peacefully in the crowd listening to what was being said. Considering how much dislike, I was putting it mildly, he no doubt had for the speakers, this is a truly tolerant and progressive human being. One with views I couldn't disagree more with, but certainly someone I could negotiate and debate with without anyone needing to be hurt or unfairly silenced or shouted at or insulted. When good arguments clash with other good arguments, that is when real progress is made. And that's what took us from cave dwellers to civilizations founded on things like personal liberty, presumption of innocence, peace and tolerance and so on. This picture was taken in May 1901 at the first Congress of the International Association for Religious Freedom, held in London. There are plenty of women and members from many other countries, including Japan, India, and many more. Note how the women are all seated and the men all standing. Those evil patriarchs were so oppressive back then, weren't they? Oh bugger, I missed one, didn't I? I'm going to go by 1901 laws and state that I think that's a female. Well, that either proves that the women were not forced to sit, after all, which I obviously expected, knowing the awful history of men, and indeed had a choice to stand or sit, whereas the men had to stand, as that was customary when ladies were present. The other possibility is that she was actually in the process of gender reassignment, and so was taking the gender-neutral posture of standing whilst holding onto the back of a chair, a foot in both camps, so to speak. Who knows? The opening address at their first meeting began with the words, "The object of this council is to open communication with those in all lands who are striving to unite pure religion and perfect liberty, and to increase fellowship and cooperation among them." The first president was Joseph Carpenter, a professor of theology and religious studies at Manchester College, Oxford. The history of that college dates back to 1757, when it was first labelled the Warrington Academy, then regarded as a dissenting academy and jam-packed with radically free-thinking intellectuals. One of their professors was Joseph Priestley, the man who discovered oxygen. When it changed its name to the Manchester Academy, it provided higher education to what were termed religious nonconformists, and it constantly sought the input of all religions from all around the world. This is just one of thousands of examples of the real truth about freedom and, more importantly, where it was born. White Christian Western societies. Liberal intellectuals forcing open debates on challenging and often incendiary topics, and they did all this without a single milkshake. I won't even mention pussy hats. Well, I'd better shut up before the Stasi get here to burn my history books. That's enough history for now anyway. Back to more modern types of progressivism. Lunatics and trumpets. This woman, inverted commas, because I never know if you're allowed to say that anymore, hovered around for quite a long time, maybe an hour or two, before throwing herself at Carl and Milo. No, not in that way. Steady on. I'm not sure if it took her that long just to pluck up the courage to launch her tirade or to come up with all of her highly intelligent verbal arguments. The ADHD trumpeter unfortunately drowned out some of it, but other parts of what she says are clear enough to hear. This is actually a good demonstration of why, as I think Carl has mentioned many times recently, one must always consider context. Take a look at Simon clearly communicating to this woman that he's going to kick the living shit out of her anytime soon. What a nasty man. Of course, when it's put in context, it obviously looks very different. As you would expect, of course, Simon being a man of the cloth and all that.
Victim blaming. Did I ask? See? No, do I deserve it? No, I don't. I'm not. I'm not blaming.
And we're back to Simon threatening her with his trocker's fist. But as you heard, he was actually pleading with her to calm down and discuss her issue with Carl. I think he says, "I'll bring a mic over in a second and you can debate him, all right?" And her answer to that suggestion was...
I don't think that's acceptable. I'm not blaming you as the victim. I'm not blaming any victim. Fuck you, you racist! What I'm saying is...
Just a couple of things I want to mention about this incident. Firstly, please take note of the proximity of that police officer. That is absolutely outrageous. The fact that he stood with his little handy-wandies, keeping them warm in his stabby-wabby, fixed to the spot like a statue. What the fuck do you get paid to do, if not to intervene in a public disorder? This woman has just launched what anyone would have assumed would have been a physical attack on Carl Benjamin if she'd have got through. That's number one. Right in front of you. Then she screamed and scuffled with Simon. That's number two. Then she swore at the top of her voice several times, even at the police as she screamed at the entire crowd, racists and telling them all to fuck off. That's number three. I think in the entire time she was less than 10 feet away from you. Jesus, I think even your face gives it away. The stress, your frown on your face suggests that you should be doing something here. And that's why you keep your hands tucked away. Because if your hands had been out of that stab vest, look, she's touching your elbow as she probably barged past you. You'd have had to do something. So you just think, keep your hands in, look forward, and you're stressed because you knew you should have been doing something. Were you under orders? Or are you just fucking inept on your own? If you are watching this with your mates at work and saying what I suspect you will be saying, something along the lines of, oh, we're not there to police their event, or it's their problem, not ours, they get what they're asking for by talking out in public, this is what you can expect, that sort of shit. You firstly need to go back to training college and learn what your duties are. Then you need to read your contract of employment and what professional standards you agreed to uphold. And then you need to take a good look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, am I impartial? If that had been a Hindu speaker or a feminist speaker or just about anyone but a white man saying politically incorrect things, and someone had waded in with that kind of abuse, I know precisely what you and all your colleagues would have been doing, and so do you. Nicking that certain someone instantly for public order or breach of the peace. I know it, everyone watching this knows it, everyone in Truro watching that on the day knew it, and most shamefully of all, you know it. You're a sorry excuse for a public servant, you really are. I'm not even saying you should have arrested her, but just some intervention. Some quiet advice in her ear about her behaviour being unacceptable. What a joke. And yet meanwhile people are arrested for saying rude things to people on Twitter. Remember this picture from earlier? It was written all over you, an hour or two earlier. Are you a statue? One of these hyper cost-effective new cardboard cut-out bobbies they stand inside aisles in supermarkets, like some sort of recyclable deterrent for crackheads. You know what I mean, the ones that only scare short-sighted grannies, meanwhile actual shoplifters use them as cover for going behind to cut the tags off the stolen goods. It looks like someone's wheeled you from the van to this spot. Okay, you're minus a jacket now, but the person in charge of statues for Truro Police, they could have easily slipped that off to make you look human. What are you doing? Oh, why do I bother? Whether you've got blood running through your veins or not, 90% of you are robots anyway these days, especially given the fact you have to behave a certain way to get any chance of being promoted. Yeah, you know exactly what I mean. 30 grand a year for a chocolate teapot. Dear me. Well, that's the end of point one, my cardboard Bobby rant. The other thing I found interesting is how this woman appears absolutely out of control with anger.
Blaming. Did I ask? See? No, do I just? No, I don't. I'm not.
She's in a frenzy. Her body language when she was being forced back by Simon, it all looked like a woman on the brink of breakdown. Just total loss of control. But was it an act? Or was it at least overplayed for effect? I wouldn't have even thought about this if I hadn't spotted her behaviour just after leaving the ring, having told the entire city of Truro to fuck off. Take a look. How does anyone that angry, allegedly, come down and be so super chilled and happy literally less than 1 second later? All smiles and stroking arms as someone equally stupid decides to commend her on her, presumably what she thinks is excellent behaviour. It's odd to say the very least. I don't think she was that angry at all. I think she wanted to be on the telly, the local news, and that's about it. I was so shocked by seeing this woman do this right under the nose of that police officer and others watching that I thought I'll go and have a word with them and find out why they didn't do anything.
Can you tell me why she wasn't arrested for Section 5? Well, there's nothing, just a verbal there.
Just a verbal there? Do you know what Section 5 actually covers? I know you do. The Public Order Act is every police officer's most commonly used statute, you know, like back of your hand. And I don't want to get on this guy's case too much because he appeared twice as professional and approachable as that other foldaway Bobby, who you'll notice is very nearby but rooted to the spot, having overheard my question. I can't be bothered to find the stats on this, but I'd have a bloody good bet that the huge majority of Section 5 arrests nationwide are for verbals. I'd guess 80 to 90%, maybe more. This officer knows this as well. Far better than me, that's for sure. But for the viewer's benefit, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, along with other sections, is what gives police the power to arrest people for basically doing or saying anything in a public place which could cause harassment, alarm or distress to other people. Note could. You don't actually have to offend anybody or alarm anybody. You just have to behave in a way which one officer, using his discretion, believes could cause the average person of sound mind to be alarmed or distressed by it. Most of this applies to words, certainly in its practical sense today. As an example, if you stand in the street and shout any kind of swear word at the top of your voice within a reasonable distance of anyone who can hear it and who might be offended by it, then you've just committed an offence under Section 5. An officer has plenty of discretion, as always, and that's a good thing in my view. Who wants robots anyway? The exact legal wording is, a person is guilty of an offence if he... Ooh, what about she? A, uses threatening or abusive words or behaviour, or disorderly behaviour, or B, displays any writing, sign or other visible representation which is threatening or abusive, within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress thereby. So, just note there, you don't even need to say anything to be committing that offence. You can just hold up a sign which could cause harassment, alarm or distress to anyone nearby. A well-known example was where a religious preacher was arrested. I'm not sure if it was Speaker's Corner or in London somewhere, but he was holding up a sign which basically said, I don't know the wording, but it said homosexuality was wrong according to his religion. He was a Christian. Probably would have got away with it if he was a Muslim, come to think of it. But anyway, the fact that he was arrested demonstrates that whilst it's obviously a tricky balancing act, the law definitely leans more towards worrying about people being offended than worrying about people's true freedom to express themselves and their religious beliefs. And it's obviously a nightmare line to walk if you're trying to balance those two things, because they're never ever going to be, you're never going to satisfy both at the same time. The problem I see with this is that anyone and everyone can be offended by anything and everything. And you can the proof that you've been offended, there's no DNA test, you can just say you were. So you have to choose whose offence you care more about. And clearly that choice has been made. I'm offended by mass immigration into my country, but nobody cares about my offence. However, if I stand in the street and preach about kicking out all Muslims, just for example, and I'm not saying I would do that, but I would be swiftly arrested if I did that for risking offence or alarm or distress to the people who might be passing by, people who my government cares more about than me, and whose rights they care about more than mine. A more salient example might be calling Carl Benjamin a fucking rapist in public, as happened on the day. Apparently that won't distress or alarm him. I'm sure it does, even though he isn't a rapist, and that's clearly slanderous. Actually, a little hint for Carl. Please start suing these people for defamation of character. Wipe the fucking floor with them. Bankrupt them. Maybe that will help them learn that facts actually do matter, and you have to be a bit more careful with your insults. You can call someone a horrible name, that's fine, that's your opinion, but to call someone a rapist, that's not an opinion, that's provable and disprovable. Get your checkbook out, get a good lawyer, and make an example of the next person who flat out lies to destroy your reputation.
Did you hear the swearing? No, I couldn't, unfortunately. Fucking wanker, she was shouting, and she just shouted it again over there. You put something better hearing than that, anyone else heard it? Not from back there with this, it's someone mad. This chap, you're allowing, yeah? You're not going to ask him to move on politely or anything? Or have you? Yeah, we've spoken to him and obviously clear what his intent is, and he's just right to be there, so... I don't know if the Prime Minister was giving a speech, he might be ordered away a little bit, but then you have more powers in that instance, cynical, sir. Yes, I know, yeah. Cynical?
Moi? Well, PC466 of Truro has gone a long way to restoring my faith in the phrase Devon and Cornwall's finest. Not just because he was pleasant and approachable, it was probably his body language and demeanour throughout the day which subconsciously caused me to go to him with my question instead of someone else, like Mr. Disinterested a few feet away. He was professional without being aloof or exuding any of that arrogance which some officers are known for, but above all, I couldn't have guessed which side he would be on if he was not here in uniform. That is what impressed me most of all, and that is extremely rare in all my contacts with the police over the next week or so, as I went to more of these events. I don't think I met one other officer who managed to carry off that word impartiality as convincingly as this chap did. Of course, he was absolutely right as well. He can't force that busker to go away, and I wouldn't have, and wasn't asking him to. I merely wondered if they'd had a chat with him, as I think that would have been reasonable. The guy was clearly only there to stifle the free and open discussion of ideas, which he's allowed to do in our law, of course. And as the officer told me, they had spoken to the trumpeter, and I'm pretty sure he'd told them he's not budging. So there's nothing they can do about that, and I wouldn't want them to. In our society, it's permissible to behave like that, and so he had his fun, fine. But the officer could have answered my questions in so many different ways. I saw most of these other ways from officers in Exeter and Plymouth over the next week or so. They said pretty much the same words, but with a sneer. No signs of that here, just polite, professional and impartial. Properly impartial. Hooray, we found a good one. I decided to go and ask the busker why he didn't believe that open debate should be allowed to take place.
You don't agree with open debate, no? Not with somebody who. That means no.
Prepare yourself, this guy went to debating class.
We could be in for a quintessential tango taste sensation here. Why, yes!
You know when you've been tangoed.
And there we have it. A leftist defends his act of shutting down debate by likening me to a disabled person. I'm not really sure much more needs to be said than that. Probably not. But I'll just point out one thing. As someone with several disabled relatives, some who I've looked after for long periods of time, I completely forgot the opportunity this degenerate just handed me on a plate. You see, if I was a leftist, I could have screamed, wet myself, maybe attacked him, and used the defence of being horribly offended by him to get away with it. Of course, I'm not a leftist, so this has literally only just dawned on me now, months later. I'm just not quick-witted enough. All that went through my head was, yeah, you're just the prick I thought you were. But I'm glad it's on tape, and no longer our little secret. Note also that two other equally lovely leftists have just witnessed this. Did they challenge his behaviour? Tell him it was unacceptable? Nah, of course not. They knew it was the best argument all fucking three of them had. The woman on the left, holy shit, she was, I think, the first person I have met in the flesh who helps me understand what Jordan Peterson meant with his phrase, ideologically possessed. It reminded me of The Exorcist, although that had better dialogue. Watch her have an out-of-body experience. She just goes pop, apparently just due to me asking her Nazi friend a question. Get ready to be very afraid again. Oh, and I should point out, she'd just been waving her hand in my face, nearly in my eye, the whole time I'd been arguing with Mr. Eugenics over there.
Is there someone inside you?
Sometimes.
What's happening? Stop! It's burning! Oh, take it!
All right, let's see what to do.
Keep away! The sour is mine. Can you take your hand out of my face? Fine, if you ask me nicely. You're very pleasant, very civilised. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm the one who's just asking a really polite question. I was actually interested in what your point of view was, by the way. I wondered why you didn't want to go and argue with him or make the point. Making music deliberately to stop the debate.
Just make a little mental note of this admission that he is deliberately drowning out the debate. Obviously, it's blatantly obvious, and he actually said the same thing to various people. I also heard no end of leftists come up to him and congratulate him on doing so, and each time he gave him a little wink and a nod, and it's obvious. Everyone knows it's obvious, but I wanted to make a point of it here, the fact that he admitted it, because it will be particularly relevant shortly.
Exactly, that is the purpose.
So, this interaction has taught me a few things. In particular, I learned that I am apparently delusional, from another world, ugly, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, and one of these. I think they did actually help me change my position on one thing though, as I can now see the sense in the famous modern leftist motto of don't debate the far right. No, you're absolutely right, that's definitely not in your best interest, is it? If this is the best you have, I'm actually also starting to see some real logic behind the milkshake attacks even. If you can't argue, but you refuse to do nothing, well, what's left but milkshakes? Apart from screaming abuse and physical assaults, obviously. Oh, and I nearly forgot earlier on, he also taught me that Carl wants to rape women. This is just such a perfect demonstration of how possessed these leftists are. Talk about losing your shit. If you stop to think about what you just said, it's utterly insane. Firstly, Carl's a married man with no criminal convictions as far as I'm aware. Secondly, as I've talked to him myself, which you refuse to do, at least for 20-30 minutes over a beer after one of the events, I'd put a shitload of money on the fact that Carl is probably more opposed to rape than you are, Mr. Take the Piss Out of Disabled People. Thirdly, and most ridiculous of all, if Carl wanted to rape women, how would you be the only one to know? He wants to rape women. It's unbelievable. How dare you? Fine, so you're a lefty little turd with a secret intolerance for people less fortunate than yourself, and you're looking for a way to sell more CDs on the street, and you love the lefty activist image because it really helps in the music scene, and maybe you just loved all the attention, and even all of that I could understand. But boy, you need to come up with something better to justify your actions than he wants to rape women. I would have far more of a solid footing on which to base a comment like, that trumpeter wants to wipe out handicapped people and everyone with learning difficulties. But I wouldn't say it, because I have no idea if it's true, and I think it's probably not. All I do know is that you clearly have enough disdain for such less fortunate people yourself, that you can use them to insult people that you don't like asking you a rational and polite question. I know that much about you, because I've just fucking seen it. You've put it on display. I haven't seen Carl raping anyone recently, have you? What a true Marxist you've shown yourself to be, Tony. And on that note, while you're busy slandering and defaming an honest, hard-working family man who's committed no crimes and hurt no one, let's take a peek at Tony King, shall we?
Well, amongst this month's nominees is a film produced and directed in the tiny creekside village of Fiocc in Cornwall.
Oh, it's so beautiful, and I shot it in black and white because it just really suited the mood of the film, you know. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's the story of a younger gentleman who's having a hard time. Oh, it was unbelievable. So I was sitting in Smoky Joe's cafe. I opened the email and there it was. It's been chosen and congratulating us on our work. And, you know, I'm quite an emotional guy and I started crying. And there's all these truck drivers around me in this cafe and, oh my goodness me.
Oh, what a kind-hearted, gentle, touchy-feely person you are. That beta male act, it goes down great at the BBC, doesn't it? Such a nice thing to use the film to touch on the important issue of a young gentleman who's having a hard time. I know someone like that. He's called Carl Benjamin. And he's had a terrible time of late. Some arsehole publicly slandered him to complete strangers by suggesting he's a predatory sex criminal in disguise. This is the public-facing Tony, isn't it? The Tony when he knows he's on display. So your film was nominated for an award. I was quite impressed. So I had to check out some of your work. I was soon unimpressed again. I found one you did called MGTOW Dave, a sad and upsetting film about a father and son. A short film about the pain of fathers losing their children due to the corrupt court system and shitty ex-wives.
That's right. Get the dads out of the kids' lives. That's the plan. Fatherlessness society. That's the plan. The big New World Order.
Tony! Are you a secret UKIP supporter? Are you a secret far-right fascist, Nazi, misogynist, etc.? It sounds a bit like that to me. Drunk man, bitching about men being phased out of society. I don't know what the hell you're doing over there on the far left, pal. Didn't you get the memo? That viewpoint has been reassigned to the far right, mate. Come on over. It's lovely and warm on the side of real values and social progress.
Well, that's the plan. Get the dads out of the house. Own the kids. Completely support the mothers. Marry them to the state. Give them 24 grand or whatever it is a year. Yeah, give up the mothers everything and strip the fathers of everything.
Yes, Tony, you've hit the nail on the head. And who strips men of all this and feeds it to women to marry them to the state? The left. Why? To get guaranteed votes from all those people they bribe with social welfare, meanwhile destroying families, ruining children's lives, like your own, bankrupting the nation and forcing taxes to go up, predominantly paid by those men who they're slowly pushing towards extinction. This is the entire political strategy of the left. This is how they got votes, and this is how they keep votes. Jesus, mate, if they find out you're hanging around with them while believing all this radical far-right pro-male bullshit, you're done for, pal. You clearly didn't get the memo about male privilege either. Jesus. Run while you still can. Run. Run for your life.
What a brilliant plan, yeah. I'm sure, my son, you are going to be impressed with what's gone on when you're a bit older. Not.
Yes, Tony, you're my man. And just like the Brexit vote, predominantly voted for by older people who have, as you rightly point out, seen a bit more and understand a bit more about the real future because they've seen a bit more of the real past. You're a UKIP man, born and bred. I'm convinced of it. The title of this video is MGTOW Dave. That obviously got my attention, considering where you appear to be on the political spectrum, and certainly compared to where your fans in Truro assumed you sat on the political spectrum while you were busy drowning out a free speech event by another English father. Joking aside, this is something I often find, and it constantly infuriates me. Take any far left type person, the type who love protesting against the establishment and all that, and you'll always find one issue, at least one, on which they are not far left, but very much in lockstep with what are now termed the far right. Why is this? Because for most people, life only deals them one personal tragedy or gross injustice where they actually learn how dangerous this far left shit really is. And so on that one issue, they often keep bloody quiet when having dinner with their lefty friends. I wish this would help wake some of you up, and I suppose it does occasionally. But the truth is, it's just way too fashionable to be lefty and way too unfashionable to oppose the left. As that just makes you far right, and who the fuck wants to be labelled far right? I certainly don't, and I'm not. I'm just not far left, and I believe there's a huge gulf of space in between being far left and being far right. It's the space occupied by people like Carl Benjamin, a traditional liberal. You see, everything has moved. The left did the removals. They shipped out all the suburban settlements around their city and banished them to exile in the evil land of the Nazis. This prevents debate between the two sides. It puts such a gulf between them that you can just throw stones and missiles at this other group because they're so far away we can't ever bridge that gap and actually have a conversation. Think about your trumpet, pal. Oh, and I should also point out, you claim to be anti-authority and anti-establishment, but the establishment is left-wing now. It's not like the 80s anymore, dude. So if you're anti-establishment, you need to pack up your bags and move out of that lefty neighbourhood pronto. Being on the left and claiming to be anti-authority in 2019 is like a communist who thinks he's better than everyone else. Or the climate change protester who rides in daddy's BMW X5 to get to the protest on time. Or the anti-fascist protester who says don't debate, just smash them because we're right and we know it. I'm seeing a whole new side to you, Tony, and I kind of like what I'm seeing, in all honesty. It's just such a shame you're only woke on one subject, and that's the subject which has brought you the most trauma and suffering you'll probably ever see in your life. Funny how being a real victim of real injustice, as a result of the left, helps people wake up to a systemic injustice so quickly. I wonder, if you'd have been a parent of a Rotherham rape gang victim, would you be a bit more of an activist on the subject of unbridled immigration of often radicalised ISIS supporters? What if you'd been a teenager in Luton who'd watched his friends and relatives attacked, raped, beaten or murdered by radical Pakistani Muslim gangs? And then you spent years of your life trying to wake the country up to the problem and the police and the councils, only to be repeatedly persecuted by the judicial system and locked up for merely talking about it. Would you be doing short films about the corrupt government and judicial system then? Food for thought, maybe? I wondered if suppressed was a synonym for shit, but my confusion about where that word came from was justified by dictionary.com. Powerful words, Tony, and you won't find many on the centre-right who would disagree with you, but you'll find plenty in your neck of the woods. Quick question for you. Having read those words at the end of your short film, fatherlessness is an obscenity, no child should be denied their human right to a father, I could not agree with you more, but I want to know, next time you're drinking with your left-wing friends, would you please put that statement to them and stand by it? That means when the lesbian or LGBTQ, pedo, etc. activist in your group says, "What about lesbian couples having children?" You can't bend the rules then. Remember you said no child should be denied, and that it's a human right for a child to have a father. I want to see how quickly you get eaten by your own, because the left always eats their own. And then you finally wake up and realise you cannot have values and beliefs like those while being on the side of the modern far left. I'll warn you though, the phrase they will scream in your face, hopefully without physically assaulting you, although I wouldn't count on it, is, "Two women can do just as good a job as a man and a woman." I wish I could be there to see how you deal with that one, but I've got a feeling I think I know how it'll go. One of two ways, actually. Number one, you give up your views under the threat of ostracism, violence, being called a Nazi or whatever, and you keep your friends. Or two, you give up your friends and you keep your values and your beliefs. I hope it's number two.
A while ago, I brought out a new CD. I've been selling them on the street, and lots of people buying them, lots of real great compliments about my sound, which I'm so humbled by.
Humbled? Said like Miles Davis himself. Humility really should come with the territory, mate. You're a busker. Did you forget? But sorry, I still just don't buy it. You may be many things, Tony, but humble ain't one of them. I don't think I've seen a more vain selection of pictures than I found on your Facebook page. Christ, my mate's daughter wants to be a model, and even her portfolio of pictures don't look as staged and vain as your selection. I also noticed your short film with full male nudity. I think I'd go with exhibitionist before I would go with humble. Hell, maybe even a tad perverted. I mean, come on. The video shows you wake up on a bed naked, walk to the window and open it naked, walk down to the kitchen naked, make a phone call to the woman you spent the night with, where she obviously compliments you on your bedroom talents.
Well, you also behave in bed like a female pirate then.
Artistic licence is so handy, isn't it, Tony? Then take a shower, naked again, then play a few scales on your horn, as you like to call it, which speaks to the idea of you being mildly perverted, and that's the end of the film. Oh, but of course you converted it to black and white, so it must be art. No, mate, I don't buy humble, not for a second. Utterly self-absorbed and as vain as a princess? Yeah, that's where I've got you pegged. And that's precisely why I think you loved every minute of both the day and the follow-up praise you got for your drowning out of the event in Truro. Well, at least hopefully some of these people will see the other face of Tony now. It's always nice to give people both sides of an issue so they can make a proper informed choice. You do agree with protest and criticism, don't you?
With lots of conversations about my biggest influence in the trumpet playing at the moment, which is Miles Davis.
Oh shit. It's funny because the biggest influence on my tennis is Roger Federer.
I even played in the piazza in Truro one day, and there was a UKIP demonstration for some bloke that was there, and I was already there busking, and it got in the news all over the country. And I'm the jazz trumpet busker that tried to drown him out, apparently. Well, I was already there busking. But anyway, that's great. I wish they'd mentioned my name, though. Anyway, I don't suppose they knew it, even. It's cooler not to be known, isn't it?
I really don't know, Tony. I don't spend my life trying to be seen as cool. Trying to fit in. Trying to be accepted and liked, regardless of how badly I have to behave in order to achieve that goal. Nobody buys that, by the way. You know, your pretense that you don't care that they didn't mention your name. But since you didn't get priority number 1, you'll make do with priority number 2, being cool. How sad. See, I've got a feeling I know how things went. Now let's assume you didn't choose that day, that time, that place in order to stifle the UKIP event. Let's just give you that, and assume you turned up, as you said, just to busk, and you were surprised as anyone to see UKIP turn up, right where you were playing. What you could have done is played, normally, at normal volume levels, and shown people your skills, sold some CDs, and actually provided some musical accompaniment to the event, rather than blasting it at 10 times the volume you usually play at, according to friends of mine who see you quite frequently down there. If that happened, then you were probably approached by the lefty types, and patted on the back, etc., persuaded to blast it super loud. You already had a larger amp than usual, though. And here's where you made the wrong decision. In my view, you decided to go with the sheep, to follow the herd, to be Mr. Popular, and do the lesser thing in order to satisfy the ambitions of your ego. To do what is less progressive and useful to society, simply because you were influenced by those around you, who were influenced by those around them, who were influenced by Twitter or news or whatever. Imagine what sort of man it would have taken to say, well, I don't know much about this guy, so I'm not going to do anything against him, I'm just here to play my trumpet. It would have taken a brave, sincerely humble, and above all, free-thinking independent man who doesn't need the adulation of those around him every waking minute. But the high road was out of reach to you, wasn't it? So you caved into peer pressure and sheep mentality. Or really, it was more like wolf pack mentality. Picking on the truly courageous man, who is capable of standing on his own 2 feet, making up his own views based on rationality and reason, and accusing him of wanting to rape women. I think the reason you said that is because you had absolutely no clue about this man. I heard you actually say that at one point too. I don't even know who he is or something like that. All you had was what a few lefty types had probably said to you in the morning, and you chose not to investigate or even question those comments. You just went all in and believed them, and then went a step further, and not only repeated what they said, but embellished it like Chinese whispers into "he wants to rape women." Even the radical feminists, who with the abusive signs they painted especially, that even they didn't say he wants to rape women. Even they didn't mention him raping women. So no, you ain't humble, Tony. You are self-obsessed, you're gullible, you're irrational, you're insecure, and above all, you're a bully. Disguised as a caring person who just wants peace, love and acceptance, man. Well, why don't you try showing some of that instead of just dishing out the words? Then people would be able to believe you. Actions, Tony, they speak louder than words. Anyone can say something. Doing it, that takes a lot more guts.
Over the next year, I'll be working on another album featuring some collaborations with some fantastic musicians from down here in Cornwall and beyond, hopefully. So that's about it from me. So cheers to everyone. It's the end of the day. I think it's wine o'clock, so I've got a nice little glass of cheeky red here. Have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you out there. And come and say hello. And if you haven't got a CD, come and get one. Anyway, lots of love, guys. Lots of love. Be kind. The kinder you are, the closer you become to the divine. Okay. Lots of love. Ciao.
On that note, I think it's time to move on. But just before doing so, a few final words for you, Tony. I don't think you're a terrible person. I think you're, well, just like most people, really. You have some faults, you make some mistakes. just like every other person on earth. But I hope you're reconsidering things, and if you really are the loving and accepting kind of guy you advertise yourself as, I think your best course of action would be an apology to Mr. Benjamin. It's your choice, of course. It could be a brief public statement of some kind on your Facebook page, at least retracting your claim that he wants to rape women. If not an apology to the many people who wanted to hear him when he spoke in Truro, maybe, who you prevented from being able to do so. You may initially think that a public statement would not be very cool, but actually I think it would be about the coolest thing you could do right now. And the few people who follow your social pages will see that you're genuinely a man who is kind and accepting of others who just fucked up. And they will think better of you for it, if they're the type of people whose opinions are worth caring about anyway. On the other hand, you could do nothing and prove the very opposite. I leave it in your capable hands. If nothing else, I just hope this has shown you that whilst it's easy to attack other people who have a high profile and make for an easy victim for bullying and abuse, you are no more perfect than the next man. None of us are. But how you correct your own mistakes, or whether you do so at all, will be the measure of you. After my attempts to have some dialogue with a few lefties, both reasonable ones and those possessed by demons, I went and bought a cup of tea and headed back over to where Carl and Milo were. As I got there, Carl was just finishing a conversation with a member of the public, and they shook hands, and then Carl decided to go and approach the feminist protesters, the ones with the insulting and pornographic placards.
I'd really like to talk to one of our lovely feminists over there. Do you reckon it's safe for me to just wander over and ask you a question?
So he walked across, the cameras followed, and he invited them to talk to him. At first, the women just flatly refused to speak. No matter how politely he asked, he was met with a collective vow of silence. They just stood and stared at him, noses up in the air, with an expression that curiously reminded me of Last of the Summer Wine. And despite his best efforts, they just pulled the "I don't talk to racists" card. It was all they had, except giving it their own little twist by adding or rapists or rape apologists. Their emotions got the better of them though, and occasionally there were a few semi-coherent words strung together. In one case, just enough for one of the women to completely incriminate herself for not only misgendering a fellow feminist, but misgendering a fellow European feminist too.
Right, so you don't want more racists or rapists or racists. Some dickheads over there. No dialogue whatsoever. So, did you learn this from the Daily Mail? Oh, that's a frustrated side, isn't it? Why don't you even tell me about what you're frustrated about? No interest in talking to you. No interest whatsoever. You seem to be sending me a message right now. I'm an idiot. Everyone here to say to fuck off collectively. Okay, so I don't seem to be supporting me. So, if everyone is on my side and your side, why don't we have a chat? Yeah, really? And I have a ticket as well, yeah. I'm happy to own it. So why are you here? Have you not had enough time over there? No, I just wanted to talk to you. You seem to want my attention. I want your attention. Oh, please.
Yes, we know you do. Because those people don't challenge you to back up your statements, do they? It's so easy to slander someone from a distance. It gets a whole lot harder when that person walks straight up to you and politely asks you to explain your insults and accusations. Well, after several commendable attempts, Carl admitted defeat on those ladies over there, but he turned to the one on the right who hadn't said anything and asked her, "Would you please have a conversation with me about your sign?" And she stared at him mute, and he asked again, and at that point, in jumps the one with the pink jacket.
Antonia's European. I'm sorry? Antonina is from Europe.
That cracked me up. The only time her mouth opens is to shout proudly about how her friend is European. Ha, what a knife in the guts of any UKIP supporter. But unfortunately, you're so clearly not up with the continental ways, cultures, languages, etc. to know that Antonio is a man's name and this is clearly a woman. Clearly a woman you don't know very well either. You couldn't make it up. It's just ridiculous. The silliest part is that this woman is as European as any of us. We are all in the continent of Europe. We didn't become Europeans when we joined the fucking EU. We were Europeans when we were at war with Hitler and for eons before that, you donut. Here's a handy way to remember it. If you live in a country which is inside the continent of Europe, you're a European. But you're also an English person, or a French person, or a German, or perhaps it should be said, a Cornish person even. But we're all European, just like everyone on the planet is an Earthling. Except me, if the trumpeter is right about my origins. But either way, what difference does it make if she's European? Is she mute? Why were you speaking for her? I take it she can get the bus and found out where to buy pens to write her sign with, so I think she can probably get by with someone asking her to tell him about the sign she's already written and presumably thought about.
So what's this then?
A wet fanny. A live vagina painting.
Explain to me what's happening here then. Why have you got this painting?
Come on, Annie, you can do it. You're European, remember? I'm here to.
What sort of message is that like trying to give? Like, what's the point? Like, I appreciate you're here like voicing your opinions, but like, how's that voicing your opinions? Like, that is. What's that?
That's art.
Yeah, so explain to me.
That's art.
Because the gentlemen's over there talk about raping them. That's why this is.
They talk about not raping them.
Oh, they are.
So explain to me why you've got this painting of a vagina then.
All men rape.
Just very briefly.
Because I'm here to say to Milo that.
Are you all right? Are you ill?
Yeah. Wet fannies are as good as his.
We like the birds.
As good as his.
Yes.
Have you got a stutter? Oh, okay.
I'm talking about my wet fanny. I'm not talking about his. Well.
No hurry. Sing it. Sing. Plenty of time. Oh, come on!
Demonstrating. UKIP giving a platform
against what? And
misogynists.
Write it. Cathcart Towers Hotel?
Cathcart Towers Hotel.
Well, where is it?
And Mr. Benjamin as well, and
Mr. Benjamin, yes, against his
the comments about the Labour MP. Is that to do with that?
That is to do with that, yes.
Yeah.
I'm supporting the MP.
Come here. You're a waste of space.
Oh! Well, you all are just really tickled by that, aren't you?
You want to try?
You want me to do sports?
Antonio's European.
I did love that accent though. That proper Cornish accent. Antonio is European. Get a life. Or if this really is important to you, which it didn't look like it, you're just smiling the whole time at the attention, but let's just say you really care, put your banner down, take that microphone, and have a conversation. Why can't you just speak to the guy? You have nothing to say, do you? When the guy says, so please, tell me, how am I a rape apologist? When have I apologised for rapists? You know you won't have a fucking leg to stand on. You just got nothing but your feminist bitching and whining. Now's probably as good a time as any to address this ridiculous rape tweet crap. When Carl commented that he wouldn't even rape Jess Phillips, it was a two-pronged attack on her, partly as a result of her obscene laughter in a backbench committee when the subject of male issues like suicide were raised, and also partly in response to her trying to shut down freedom and the right to remain anonymous on the internet. The left are obviously all over that idea like a rash, but for no reason other than self-interest and political goals. There's only one group of people they're interested in preventing from having any anonymity online, though, and that's their opponents, more and more of whom are forced to hide their identity online when just expressing their non-Marxist opinions, to avoid them being targeted, doxed, and attacked by Antifa, losing their jobs, friends, maybe even arrested in the future over historic, politically incorrect comments online, and so on. Jess Phillips has stated that she believes people should not be allowed to remain anonymous on the internet. Why the hell not? Oh yes, I remember, because you can't censor them if you don't know who they are, nor can you lock them up in your gulags for hate speech or other mythical new crimes you have in the pipeline. You can ring someone up from a withheld number and threaten them, harass them, call them names, tell them you're going to rape them if you want. You can do that from a withheld number. Should we ban them? Ban withheld numbers? How come we've managed to get on okay with withheld numbers? You can walk up to someone in the street, call them a name, or actually on the street, you can physically attack them, shoot them, rape them, kill them, whatever. You can't do that online. And you can then run away, never to be found. Should we carry ID cards around the clock? Maybe a face tattoo? Or maybe we should have facial recognition cameras in every public place? Or what about private places? Bad things happen there too. What about in our homes? With Siri and Alexa, we're probably halfway there already, but that's for another video. You get where this is going, I'm sure. If not, you need to read Gulag Archipelago for a wee introduction to how this shit grows legs in all directions when ideologues like Jess Phillips start getting their way on little erosions of our freedoms and rights which we all enjoy unless we oppose the left. This article from The Guardian is... I didn't choose The Guardian for any particular reason. If you go on Google, you'll find 100 or more articles. It's basically like a great big press release. They're all worded almost identically, so I haven't picked The Guardian for any reason. Labour MP calls for end to online anonymity after 600 rape threats. I'd like to see an example of just one credible rape threat she received. Not 10, not 600, just one. Because I don't buy this claim for a second. And as she has provided nothing but her words, we can't possibly know. And with the huge political benefits she has in drawing out people's sympathy, I think it's reasonable to ask for more than just her say-so. If someone receives a death threat, and that's a criminal offence all of its own in UK law, then it must be credible. In other words, they have to mean it. They have to have a demonstrable or at least reasonably believable intent to kill that person. People say things like, "I'll kill you," in hundreds of different contexts every single day. The reason the prisons aren't full of people who've done this is because 99.9% of them are not actual death threats. Because they had no intent. They were joking or just using a turn of phrase for a variety of hundreds of reasons, none of which include the actual criminal intent required to arrest them and charge them with threats to kill. A rape threat, or any sincere malicious threat, is no different. To be deemed a real threat, it must be credible. It must be meant as a real threat of actually committing the act. So I merely ask the question, has anyone threatened to rape her? A simple screenshot would be so easy to produce and plenty good enough to demonstrate, to show an example of what she's calling a rape threat. That's why we haven't seen one. Those who have seen all the tweets is Twitter and their investigators, who saw nothing against their terms and conditions. Social networks should have access to real identities to flush out abusers, says Jess Phillips. Under the picture there, if you speak from a feminist perspective, which I very frequently do, when the fuck do you not? You will suffer from a huge amount of internet trolling, says the Labour MP. You either peddle your wares and take the rough with the smooth, or you get out of it and give it up. Nobody forced you to preach your anti-male bullshit every second of every day. It's a choice you made. So suck it up, and yeah, grow a pair. And don't freak, that's what men get told, so it's surely good enough for you. I don't want to discriminate. You want to make sure people can be identified, and why could you possibly want that? It reminds me of a saying a good friend of mine quoted to me once about gun licensing. Something like, the only reason for registering a firearm is for future confiscation. And the more you think about it, the more you realise the truth in that. It's the only reason. Just like the only reason to register a vehicle is for the very same thing, such as when you don't pay your tax, buy car. So you want everyone on social media to be identifiable. Why? So that if everyone has to register their voice on social media, you can come along and take it away if you don't like the words they speak with that voice. Why else? Short version, political censorship. So no, getting shit from people online when you speak from a feminist perspective is not indicative of trolls. It's indicative of the fact that so many people despise your ideology. And when I say people, I'm not just talking about horrible sexist men. Most women are not feminists, and considering the pressure on all women to be feminists, it stands to reason that most women appear to hate feminism as much as their husbands do. God, that must piss you off. And I've just spotted something else. I always got to read these things 2 or 3 times. as she called for online trolls to no longer be allowed anonymity. Hasn't she just called these 600 people trolls? Well, sorry, Jess, I disagree. People who make credible threats to rape women, in my book, are not trolls. They're dangerous criminals. But by calling them trolls, haven't you just completely given yourself away? So what is a troll? Internet trolling, how do you spot a real troll? If you consider yourself to be pretty active on social media or other types of online communities, you may have experienced what many savvy internet users call internet trolls, or being trolled, which is when someone comments or responds to something you post, usually in a confrontational way that is designed to garner a strong emotional reaction. So they're going to get that out of you, so I can see why you're a troll magnet. Urban Dictionary, someone who deliberately pisses people off online to get a reaction. So the very fact that you term these people trolls, I believe, shows, beyond any doubt, that even you don't deem anything they say as serious or to be taken seriously. It's designed purely to get an emotional reaction. That proves that you believe these messages were not rape threats. This one was on the BBC website. It's a different article. The most important thing here is sometimes I would rather... This is a woman who says shit like this. Sometimes I would rather someone punch me in the face than the constant degradation you suffer as a woman in the public eye. Holy shit. Firstly, yeah, it's got to be a woman, because men don't suffer shit, do they? But she actually said she'd rather someone punches her in the face. That can only be said by someone who's never been punched in the fucking face. I mean, how many women out there have been punched in the face, or maybe get punched in the face every night by their abusive husbands or partners or whatever, and... I mean, do these women not read that and go, you fucking callous bitch? You haven't got a fucking clue. You think you've got a hard life on Twitter? Try my fucking life. How can she say this and still call herself a feminist? It's constant. It constantly belittles you. It makes you blame yourself. Freudian slip, perhaps? Is that because you're a woman in a man's world and you're always programmed by the patriarchy to blame yourself? Or is it because it is your fault? I'm just asking. You said it makes you blame yourself. Why? I don't think Carl Benjamin blames himself for someone throwing a milkshake at him. Because that's a criminal assault, by the way. So you haven't been assaulted. And you're blaming yourself for receiving all these bad words. Well... maybe question yourself a bit more. Maybe think, why am I getting this? What am I doing wrong? Why do so many people fucking hate me? And before you say, well, that's just because they're all horrible people and I'm perfect. Birmingham Live did an article about the Katie Hopkins... here it is. Katie Hopkins took to Twitter to share a video interview from the Yardley politician, captioning it, "Imagine if a right-wing MP used their child for a media stunt." This was Jess Phillips putting her 10-year-old on the steps of Downing Street, doing a bit of early career progression, I think. Katie Hopkins was basically saying she thinks it was a bit of a cheap stunt. The government don't have a responsibility to look after our children, parents do, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's Katie Hopkins' opinion. She ends it with schools have a responsibility to teach maths, English and unrevised history. Take a shower, Jess Phillips. Okay, so that's about as personal as Katie Hopkins got, which for Katie Hopkins is pretty fucking benign. Take a shower. Jess Phillips's response... This person who doesn't agree with abuse and trolling and everyone should be locked up and fucking de-anonymised online if they say anything hurtful, responds, imagine, she can't punctuate, so this is going to be tricky for me, but imagine, do you know what, I can't think of anything worse than you, so just imagine being you, shit gig, tough break, condolences. Yeah, no personal attacks there, were there, Jess? Just reminds me of you saying, it makes you blame yourself. Jess Phillips demanded that Twitter take some action, as well as the police. And amazingly enough, considering they had all the hard proof of the 600 rape threats she claims to have received, plus all the ones she didn't count, Twitter took no action, which is really curious. Instead, they just advised her to use the filters inside Twitter, which really pissed her off. And that, for me, is proof that her claims were, at best, massively exaggerated. So in typical spoilt brat, stroppy feminist style, she threatened to close her account and leave Twitter. It's a threat. Twitter, do what I want, or else. And it failed. Did she leave?
Yeah.
She's got a book to promote. She's got a pinned tweet at the top of her Twitter page offering signed copies, for God's sake. This is someone who, just a year or two ago, had, I don't know, 60 to 80,000 followers. Look at it now. Should be thanking Carl Benjamin for that. And all your other detractors and trolls. Jess Phillips uses victimhood as a marketing ploy and a political campaigning strategy. And it's a very effective one. Even with that few lines you get to give your little bio on the side of your Twitter page, a sentence or two to tell the world what you want them to know about you, to associate you with, what you're about, what defines you. How do you sum up someone with a life like hers, with all the things she does and all the political success and everything? How do you sum all that up in one or two lines? That's what I'd be thinking. No, not Jess. She takes that opportunity and uses it to quote George Galloway's opinion of her. That is what Jess wants people to think of her as, a victim. I am what other people say about me. I am Carl Benjamin and the rape threats. I am, because that attracts much more support and money than just doing it the decent, honest way. Campaigning on good ideas that stand up to debate. It's just so cheap and so transparent. She should be paying Carl Benjamin commissions for a lot of those book sales. Every bad comment or spat she gets into with people like Carl, she just rings the till one more time. But being a socialist, of course, it's not about the money. Or at least it's not all about the money. It's about preventing anonymous internet usage. That's your main goal. Making a few quid on the side is just a cherry on the top. I wonder how many whistleblowers we would never have had if they hadn't had the protection of anonymity. Ask any Iranian reformist, or unhappy North Korean, or Chinese free speech activist, and so on. They slowly erode freedoms to head towards a Stalinist-like state, and they do this by creating new insane laws like misgendering someone, and combining that with making sure people can't say things without being identified. And hey presto, we have a police state, as far as free speech goes. And the paedophile gangs, lawless traveller families, Islamic terrorists, all the other real day-to-day hard crimes go on just as always. Have a read about Stalin's rule and you'll see that this was quite literally how he saw things. He had very little concern with murderers and common criminals. They didn't threaten him. It was all about what people say. That was what got you executed at the drop of a fucking hat. Or if very lucky, maybe just an entire lifetime of backbreaking work in -40 temperatures for doing something truly evil like, I don't know, believing in God or not being happy to have your farm taken from you. People like Jess Phillips operate in much the same way. But thankfully they don't yet have a strong enough grip on power to fully control what people say and think. But that's what they want. That's why they need to keep working so hard, such as removing the right to anonymity online. Just one in 1,000 little things they need to do to engineer the framework that they need to have that kind of tyranny. Real crime is not on their list of priorities. Their problem is people questioning them, criticising them, calling them out on their bullshit, and basically going against the red party line. Jess Phillips was born in a red fucking nappy. She's an insatiable socialist, which we know is just a communist in sheep's clothing. And she is one of the leading voices pushing this country over the brink into that tyranny, which all staunch socialist nations eventually become. Carl, of course, knows all of this, and probably a lot more. So, as a protest, as well as a demonstration of where this is all going, and no doubt as a well-deserved dig at Jess Phillips, who he rightly despised for her disgustingly flippant regard for men's issues, like the massive problem of male suicide, he made a little joke about her. And this, for me, is the most important point that just doesn't seem to be getting discussed. Not on mainstream media, anyway. The joke was not about rape. The fucking joke was about Jess Phillips. She was the butt of the joke. Just like when she called him a neckbeard. She wasn't making a joke about beards. She was making a joke about him. An insult. And one she was perfectly entitled to make, in my view. But by the same token, he insulted her. He did not do anything relating to fucking rape. Rape was the lever of the joke. It was not the butt of it. Nor were rape victims, or anything else for that matter. It's such a typical leftist, disingenuous tactic, and this is what made it so clever of Carl, because he knew she would do it. She'd just take the bait. It's easy to misrepresent it, of course, and that's why he gave her the bait, and boy did she take it. But there is no getting round the fact that this deliberately hurtful and insulting joke, tasteless and crass as it may well have been, is not about rape. It is about Jess Phillips and his opinion of her. Being someone who routinely insults and attacks all men, collectively, and the actual serious issues which affect them, she can't get enough insults as far as I'm concerned. No amount of insults could ever level the playing field up against her daily feminist anti-male vitriol. But Carl knew she would do exactly what she did, and she went ahead and did it. Let's try a little exercise. Here's a joke. How do you sink an Irish submarine? Knock on the door. Okay, now here's a multiple choice question. What was that joke about? A. Submarines. B. Doors. C. Knocking. Or D. Irish people. Are you getting it? Oh, and in case you wake up tomorrow with a rational mind between your ears, here's one other way of looking at it. He thinks you're a complete fucking idiot, and he said those words to get under your skin, and using a metaphor, he showed his disdain for you. Metaphorically. Nothing more, nothing less. Take a deep breath, move on, and grow the fuck up. Or call him some names back, like Neckbeard, for instance.
The interior is very aerodynamic. Exactly.
After the event finished, Carl and Milo wandered over to the Wetherspoons pub for a few drinks and a less formal chat with anyone who wanted to come along. It was pleasant and relaxed, at least it was for an hour or two, until a strange bunch turned up with clearly bad intentions. I was chatting to people outside the pub, and Carl had just come outside to the small garden area at the front where there was pictures being taken and lots of handshaking and stuff like that. At that moment I got a feeling something was going on around us. I turned to look behind me and noticed a group of men, or really a gang as they were all in matching gang colours, who had plainly organised their visit beforehand and turned up pretty much mob-handed. Although I had spotted them arriving, I hadn't really taken much notice of them, at least not until I saw them choose to hurdle the barrier around the tables. It was clear they wanted to get as close as they could to Carl, and they couldn't get into that area. It was too full up from the other end, so they hopped the fence. I was pretty sure some kind of physical attack was imminent. Knowing I had my camera on, I shifted over to the other side of Carl so I could stand next to this group, partly to try and be well placed to intervene in some way if I could. Once I got next to them, it was obvious they were planning something. One comment I heard from behind me removed any doubt I might have had. I could tell they were riling each other up until their appointed Billy Big Bollocks decided it was time to go for it, whatever it was. I was stood in between them and Carl, so I knew they would have to force me out of the way when they made their move, which they did quite quickly. I was just praying all they wanted to do was say something to him rather than do something.
What's your problem? What's your problem? Keep out the fucking way. No, I don't have to keep you out of your way. No, I don't. Yes, you do, mate. No, I don't. Push me. I didn't push you. You pushed me. Yes, you did. Right? Stand back. What is your problem? Stand back. Right? What is your problem? Definitely up for it. Yeah, what sort of fucking fuck do you do then? Take fucking Tom and Rob from you. Go back to you. Do you not think Cornwall's a party? No, it's not, mate. Are you interested in attacking? Attacking you? Yeah. No. Well, you just gave that lad a shove, didn't you? No, he threw me away. No, you did. No, you pushed me. You did push me. Don't like fucking rapists, like. I'm not rapist. Why wouldn't I really call it? Why are you just running around like levelling accusations like that? I don't understand. Why would you say that? Stop. Look, you're trembling. Why are you so angry? We're both Cornish here. I'm Cornish. She's actually legit. Why are you so angry? You don't know me, do you?
No, of course he doesn't. But he knows all he needs in order to justify his inner caveman instinct, which is probably a result of his suppressed or misguided nationalism, and lead his tribe into battle against the evil foreigner. It's so see-through, I can't decide whether it's excruciating or hilarious. I mean, if you sent this bloke back a few decades, he'd hop out of the TARDIS wearing Doc Martens with white laces, a love-hate tattoo on his knuckles, a Union Jack string vest, and a blanket refusal to ever use his local corner shop for his beer and fags. Too many darkies in there. Can you see what's happened? The intolerance and hatred has never, gone away. It didn't disappear, and it didn't fade away. It just jumped ship to the far left. And the leftist media, and probably the local Antifa brigade, riled this oxygen thief up into coming out to ward off the foreign threat, now replaced by an intellectual, law-abiding married father with a beard and a suit, who believes in complete freedom of association and tolerance for all. The truth really is stranger than fiction.
Who have you just taken on? What do you mean? Well, who's your newest member?
Did you catch that? He asked Carl, who's your newest member? Having already mentioned Tommy Robinson. Someone in the crowd said, it's not Tommy Robinson. And that person knew that that was a name this gang had mentioned a few times, which is why he said it. He turns away at this point. I genuinely believe this idiot actually thinks Tommy Robinson is UKIP's newest member. I think this actually knocks his confidence a bit. He's just learned something, accidentally, by talking to someone, which I don't think was the intention he came with. But far more incredible is the fact that this group seemed to have a strong dislike of Tommy Robinson, yet all he's ever done is oppose radical Islam and maybe show a bit of pride in his nation. What the fuck are you people doing? You have a Celtic emblem on your little gang hoodies. You told Carl to get the fuck out of Cornwall as if it's all yours. You also said Cornwall is not part of the UK. I mean, are you anything but nationalists yourselves? The only thing that stops you being nationalist is the fact you don't have a nation. There's no doubt about where you stand and where you would stand if you did. If Tommy Robinson was Cornish, he'd be running your gang. When I first heard you say Cornwall isn't in the UK, I thought that was being said figuratively or metaphorically. But once I clicked that you didn't even know Tommy Robinson wasn't in UKIP, I changed my opinion. I think you are actually just that ignorant.
But why are you so angry? I can't understand that. So I'd love to actually find out what it is you stand for, what you're about.
But man, you'll probably be end of the career.
You might have points that I agree with.
Sargon about things that I believe in. See you off camera.
We're not on camera, are we? No. Right, is that a threat?
Yeah, it sure as hell sounded like one, didn't it? The silly thing is, there were no cameras there. At least none which Billy Shrinking Bollocks knew about. What he actually meant by that comment was more like, see you when I've got my head straight, because now I'm really fucking confused and I think I've lost my bottle a bit too, if I'm honest. And so you should, because your hatred of this man couldn't be more misplaced or misguided. Whilst I would like to think Carl won you over with the power of rational debate, I just don't give you that much credit, sorry. I'd like to, but I can't. I think the numbers of people around you, and in very close proximity to you, and the fact that plenty of them were Cornish and told you so, was the reason you decided to pull the plug in your fascist mission. What you can't see in this video, in fact what nobody could see even at the time, except me and only me, because I just happened to be in exactly the right spot at exactly the right second, is this new age skinhead had his hand wrapped tightly round a knife in his back right pocket from the minute he confronted Carl until he walked away there. When I moved from being on the right hand side of Carl to the front, after he tried to pick a fight with me, I moved there deliberately because I was so sure he was going to attack Carl. I moved extremely close to him, right behind him, and I watched his hands closely. His right hand was already in his back pocket of his jeans. That's why he kept half turned away from Carl. I could see he wanted to keep his right arm free and leave some space to swing it. I wasn't worried about much more happening than a punch or two at that point, but then I looked at the hand in his pocket and saw a nice bright red penknife clutched in his right fist inside the pocket. And his hand was white. His knuckles were white with how tight he was gripping it. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. I knew nobody else was aware of it, and this basically put me in the position, or at least it felt like it, of being responsible for Carl being stabbed if he did get stabbed. I didn't know whether to tell someone or just keep it to myself. For more than a few seconds, I was completely convinced it was going to happen. His body language and his tone, and he was out of breath. He was obviously full of adrenaline. You can even hear Carl mention it. The guy was shaking. Carl could see he was shaking. And while I'm no expert on stabbing people, I'm pretty sure, generally, most people who are planning on going and having a word with someone don't have so much adrenaline in their system that they can't stop their bodies shaking. People who are shaking like that tend to be people who know they've got something planned in their head that is pretty fucking serious. I moved the table behind me to clear some space to drag the piece of shit into, if I could, and I waited. hoping Carl's reasoning and the fact that people were circling in tightly would put the guy off doing what I think he came fully intending to do. I glanced at his mates over there on the right, and they were all doing that shifty look left, look right up the street thing, checking up the street to the left, which was a one-way system, to see if the coast was clear. I would have put money on it that blood was about to be spilled, and I was only hoping most of it was going to be theirs. And I think it would have been, but Carl could have been seriously injured beforehand. Thank God he did change his mind. Whatever the reason for that was, he should be pleased that he did. Not just because he would have lost, and not just because he would probably have gone to prison, although you never know considering who his target was, but mainly because one day he would have discovered that he was targeting a man who was not what he thought he was. The only regret I have is not having the presence of mind to take a photo of that knife in his pocket. I was completely absorbed in reading the muscles on the back of his neck, hoping to get a split-second warning of him pulling it out and launching it. In fact, that's not the only regret, actually. The other regret is that due to the adrenaline, I think, I didn't even consider calling the police. It didn't even cross my mind until probably an hour later. But being brutally honest, even if I had thought to do that, I'm not sure I would have done. I mean, I would have had to give my name and address, a full statement, and this person would likely find out through the courts or the police those details, and then what if the knife was a street legal one, and with a bit of help from modern left-leaning coppers and judges, he gets fuck all, or maybe a caution, and I get known by this gang for life. Don't even know who the fuck they are. However, if I'd heard that the milkshaker from the morning had been arrested and charged, I probably wouldn't have that impression. I'd have a different outlook. The very worrying truth is that until someone actually gets stabbed, or worse, and maybe someone is locked up for life, and then the police put out a different message, you know, something like, if you break the law, you'll pay for it, no matter which side you're on. Until then, I see this sort of thing growing faster and faster. Free speech really has become genuinely dangerous. And it's not actually Carl's free speech which led to this, it's the misrepresentation, that's understating it, of the facts by the left. It's the painting of him as something he's not, by all the mainstream media. So for any BBC journalists out there, or maybe any CBS bimbos describing criminal assaults as a cheeky little tool of protest, I hope you fucking realise that when something terrible happens, and it's a when, not an if, trust me, you will have blood on your hands. Maybe you should give that some thought, next time you stitch people up with lies. Well, that was the end to my day in Truro. I hung around for an hour or two after this little visit from those who think they speak for Cornwall. More than the majority of Cornish who voted for Brexit, by the way. And then I headed back to my car for the long journey home. But this wasn't the last time Carl was threatened before the day was done. However, as I didn't witness what happened firsthand, I won't comment further on it. Once I was back in my car, I remembered that someone had mentioned Carl's tour taking in a few other towns in the southwest before they headed home. I could remember hearing Plymouth and Exeter mentioned, amongst others, so I called a friend who lived down there and sorted out a bed for the night so I could stick around. I searched online before I went to bed and realised the next event was actually the following day in Plymouth. I charged up my camera gear, got some sleep, and then headed to Plymouth to see what insanity we might find there. I wasn't going to be disappointed.